Hi everyone, this is Nelusa Pathmanathan from the Visualization Research Center of the University of Stuttgart. I'm going to present our work, Been There, Seen That, Visualization of Movement in Three-Dimensional Eye Tracking Data from Real-World Environments on behalf of my co-authors, Seyda Öney, Michael Becher, Michael Sedlmair, Daniel Weiskopf, and Kuno Kurzhals. In our work, we want to find out how people perceive different environments. And the main questions we had were, what are they looking at? When do they look at particular objects? And where is their visual attention distributed? To answer the previous questions, eye tracking plays an important role since it allows the recording of gaze information. Eye tracking has become a tool for the evaluation of gaze behavior in different contexts. Early researchers utilized eye tracking to evaluate desktop-based scenarios like web design or user behavior in games. Gaze behavior in three-dimensional environments was mainly analyzed on desktop-based virtual environments. Here you can see, for example, different type of heat map visualizations onto three-dimensional objects from the work of Sedlmair et al. The advancement in eye tracking, however, made it now possible to track gaze behavior in real-world environments or AR/VR environments. Mobile eye tracking glasses as well as AR/VR HMDs with integrated eye tracker allow tracking the gaze behavior and the movement behavior of different users in a three-dimensional spatial context. Based on this, behavioral data of different persons can be tracked in spatial environments, and analysts can evaluate 3D designs in the space, for example architectural designs, or behavior in different spatial contexts, like for example in construction or fabrication processes. Han, for example, utilized modified mobile eye tracking glasses with the V-SLAM algorithm to track the gaze and movement behavior of a person in relation to the environment. In a post-processing step, he generated a visualization showing the movement behavior using trajectories as well as gaze behavior using points. Other works, like for example from Kläuber and colleagues, Becher and colleagues, and Reibschläger and colleagues, introduce visualization of movement and interaction behavior in VR as well as in AR environments. However, they neglect the visualization of gaze data. Reibschläger and colleagues do provide a visualization for the visual focus of people using the head orientation. This allows to visualize the view cone of a person, but does not replace the actual gaze data obtained through eye tracking technology. In our work, we want to extend these existing approaches by visualizing gaze information not only over space, but also over time. Therefore, we provide a space-time cube visualization showing the behavioral data of different people over space and time, and link this visualization to a three-dimensional gaze replay, which provides a detailed inspection of the behavioral data at selected points in time, similar to a video player. This visualization does not only show an overview of the tracked data, but also allows to compare the data of multiple people. We propose a framework which explains how a visualization can be generated, which allows the comparison of multiple gaze and movement behaviors, includes detailed information about the surrounding without annotation, and displays data which allows to answer typical analysis questions. The first phase of this framework contains the different modalities needed for collecting the necessary data. The main data needed are gaze and pose data, which can be obtained through HMDs, and spatial context information, which can be collected through laser scans and other photogrammetry approaches. The second phase covers the problems which appear after data collection. The main issue here is the need of a unified model to compare the different data collected. The last phase is the visualization. For 3D movement and gaze data, different visualization techniques can be developed. These can be visualized through a three-dimensional gaze replay, a space-time cube, or immersively in AR or VR. In our work, we collected the data within a small-scale pilot study with 10 participants. The task of the participants was to view an artwork collection in a specified order. We defined 2 different orderings and assigned 1 order to each participant. In the end, we had 4 participants following this order, while the other 6 participants followed this order. The data of 2 participants from here were recorded synchronously. For recording the gaze and movement, we utilized the HoloLens 2, which has an integrated eye tracker. Here you can see how the behavioral data of 2 people gets tracked while examining an artwork in our gallery. The HoloLens 2 is capable of generating a mesh of the surrounding. For the visualization, however, we derived a separate photogrammetry mesh from 494 images using reality capture to have a more detailed spatial context. In our approach, the origin of the recording was always set to the position of the HoloLens when the application started. Since the individual recordings start at different origins, it is important to merge them into a unified coordinate system to make them comparable. To solve this issue, we used a QR code board and placed it in the corner of our basement where we conducted our pilot study. The QR code board consists of 4 markers placed at each corner. The participants were asked to scan the codes before the recording was started, and a virtual object was placed at the center of this board by averaging over the different QR codes to minimize errors while positioning the object. This virtual object served as an anchor. We stored the rotation and position information of this object in each recording and merged the individual recording data into a common coordinate system based on this information. The last stage of the framework deals with the different visualization techniques that can be developed to analyze the gaze and movement behavior recorded in a 3-dimensional environment. In our work, we propose a gaze replay linked with a space-time cube and an additional immersive replay. First, we developed a gaze replay which allows the playback of the gaze and movement behavior of the participants. We represented the participants using 2-dimensional sprites and included an array that visualized the gaze direction and gaze location. For this visualization, we combined the laser scan data with the recorded gaze data and movement data from the HoloLens. Additionally, we integrated a heat map visualization which shows how the visual attention is distributed at specific points in time. The fixations of the heat map are accumulated over time. The heat map shows the accumulated fixations starting from the lower time border until the current point in time. In our work, we aim to extend the gaze replay visualization with a space-time cube. Here, the entire GUI of our visualization is shown. We link the space-time cube to the gaze replay such that users can take a look at the overview and inspect interesting regions in more detail within the gaze replay. The analysts can freely navigate in both views. Our GUI consists of a menu in which different functions and parameter settings can be altered, a UI to filter the data by participant, and a timeline to skip to timespans of interest. The space-time cube visualization visualizes the trajectory of the participants over time as depicted here, and additionally visualizes the gaze distribution using a gaze cube visualization. The trajectory visualizations do show the movement of the individual participants over space and time. Since we specified 2 different orders for viewing the artwork collection, we have 2 different patterns of movement. The first 2 images show the movement of participants recorded asynchronous. The third image shows the movement of 2 participants which were recorded synchronously and followed the order of this group here. Based on this visualization, we can see how in the synchronous recording a clear pattern gets visible, while in the asynchronous recording the pattern cannot be detected at first glance. The gaze cube visualization shows the gaze distribution of the participants over space and time. Since the y dimension is replaced by time in the space-time cube, we decided to project each fixation of the participants onto the xz plane and stack the fixations over time along the y-axis. Thereby, the information on the vertical axis gets lost in the spacetime cube visualization. To visualize the fixations over time, we placed a grid of fixed size onto the xz plane of the spacetime cube. Each fixation projected onto a grid cell gets saved within the cell along with its time information. Afterward, a cube is generated to represent each fixation within the cell and stacked according to the time information above the corresponding cell. To visualize the fixation intensity at the different regions, we utilized a Viridis color map. This helps the analyst to detect regions with high and low visual attention. The fixation intensity looks at the number of fixations in each grid cell on the xz plane and colors all the gaze cubes stacked over these cell locations accordingly. Here you can see, for example, a cell that received the highest number of fixations, while here you can see a cell that received a rather low amount of fixations. In the immersive view, we visualized the gaze replay in VR, allowing the users to view the environment from the perspective of the participants. The users were able to teleport to the different regions in the environment and take a close look at the gaze and movement behavior of the different participants. We included a footprint visualization showing the movement path of the different participants. We conducted 2 different kinds of experiments to evaluate our visualization techniques. We omitted the evaluation of the immersive replay for now, since it requires a different setup and additional training time for the participants. We first conducted a think-aloud experiment in which the participants were asked to solve a set of analysis tasks using our visualization technique. These tasks were related to the movement patterns and the gaze distributions shown in the visualization for a specific data set. The main points participants were saying were that the trajectory visualization within the space-time cube provides the whole course of movement. Therefore, the participants were able to see the different motion patterns. Also, they mentioned that visual clutter appears when multiple trajectories are visualized. This made it difficult to follow the individual trajectories. They were also viewing at the different vertical lengths of the trajectories when a person was viewing an image and said that people took different amounts of time to look at the images. Since the trajectories are visualized in 3-dimensional space, some participants also had difficulties in matching the trajectories to the corresponding positions due to the perspective view. When it came to the gaze distribution, some had difficulties in understanding the visualization. However, the majority of participants were able to detect regions with high and low visual attention by looking at the gaze cube visualization or the heat maps within the gaze replay. Some mentioned that the background color of the images influences the heat map color in the gaze replay due to its transparent nature. In the second experiment, we conducted an interview with 2 domain experts for spatial cognition. We presented them our visualizations over an online conferencing system and asked them how they would use our visualization in their research field and what they are missing in our proposed visualization. Mainly, they were interested in periods where people were processing some kind of information. Therefore, they suggested the inclusion of aggregated statistics within the visualization to extract knowledge. They further mentioned that our approach can replace traditional videos, which are time-consuming to extract time spans of interesting gaze behavior. With our tool, they could add filtering routes, which provide them with interesting snippets of gaze behavior. They also mentioned that our visualization can help them to detect outliers and whether the general pattern of behavior follows their expectation. At the end, they also added that our space-time cube visualization only works for a subset of potential cases, since their work is related to multi-level buildings. In our example, the participants were viewing a collection of different artworks. Based on this, we were able to analyze in which order the artworks were viewed and if a specific pattern in the trajectory is visible. Here, for example, the synchronous recording reveals that 2 people were viewing the artwork together. The asynchronous recordings do show different patterns and therefore reveal that the persons were viewing the images independently from each other. At this location, we can assume that the trajectory of the people was intersecting and conclude that they could have met each other. When looking at the gaze cube visualization, we can see how the gaze was distributed overall and which images were the most or least interesting ones. Further, the visualization reveals which regions were missed and allows the detection of outliers. In our work, we proposed a framework for the visual analysis of gaze data recorded in three-dimensional environments. We followed this framework and implemented a visualization technique linking a gaze replay with a space-time cube, and additionally provided an immersive replay in VR. The results of our experiment showed that there is still room for improvement. Therefore, we plan in the future to extend our visualization by including, for example, the possibility to visualize behavior in multi-story buildings, include possibilities for extracting aggregated statistics out of the tracked behavior data, include aggregated visualization for trajectories, and further. Besides extending our visualization, we also see much potential in including additional sensor modalities for tracking a higher range of behavior and visualizing them. We also believe that it is important to enable behavior visualization for dynamically changing environments. Our work is limited to a simple use case here. Therefore, we want to conduct experiments in other domains, such as in construction and fabrication processes, in the future.